Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to have you for this discussion. We'll explore how people and culture intelligence are shaping the future of work and share actionable strategies to build smarter, agile organizations. So, what makes this topic so critical now? With AI, data analytics, and global challenges transforming not just the way we work, but the way we live, HR is uniquely positioned at the heart of this evolution. There's higher demand for practical strategies to balance the technological capabilities with nuances in human behavior. So, today's discussion will explore how people and culture intelligence connect technology, culture, and human centricity to drive meaningful change in our organizations. Today's speakers are global thought leaders, pioneers in people and culture intelligence, and innovative drivers of HR transformation. They're here to share experience and offer advice you can hopefully apply in your organizations. So, Charlie Sull is a globally recognized expert in corporate culture and AI, as co creator of the widely read Measuring Culture series and co founder of CultureX. Charlie worked with leading companies to improve their cultures. Charlie, hi.
Hi, Nina. Thanks for having me.
Jason Averbook is a senior partner at Mercer, a top 25 HR consultant and global leader in digital HR. He is shaping the future of work by leading Mercer's generative AI strategy. Hi, Jason.
Nina, how are you? Thank you so much for having me, and excited to be on the panel here with Max and Charlotte.
Thank you. Dr. Max Blumberg is founder of Blumberg Partnership and helps global organizations enhance their productivity with AI-driven strategies. He's a visiting professor and researcher focused on aligning HR with business outcomes. So let's dive in. With the cultural measurement, using the 100 plus cultural dimensions, what do you see from practice, like the major obstacle from fully embracing it? Because I'm not very confident that there's so many organizations out there. They are as, let's say, aware about the impact of having this culture measurement. What's your view on this?
Yeah, so in order to transform a culture, and I actually disagree with Max that this will take 5 or 6 years. If you have effective cultural measurement and leadership buy-in, you can see tremendous results even in very large companies within a year. But those are really the two pieces you need. And right now in 2024, the technology is excellent. The technology is pretty much already there, and I'm sure it's going to get even better in the future, and I'm excited about that. But the technology, at least for cultural measurement, this culture AI that I'm talking about, not necessarily agentic AI, is already there. The real missing piece now is leadership buy-in, because you can have the best data in the world, the best technology in the world, the best insights in the world. If leadership doesn't act on those insights, then the culture is simply not going to change very much. So the key, I would say, for HR leaders isn't so much the technology. You can just go out and buy that, or you can develop it in-house. It's relatively cheap and it's possible to make now. It's more about making the business case to executive leaders that culture matters and you should prioritize culture. And the two most effective steps I've found for that are, one, ground everything in high quality data. So chances are, if you're listening to this, you don't already have a culture AI platform installed. But what you can do is go to places like Glassdoor, Indeed, Kununu, Fairy Godboss, and get a lot of rich cultural data off of the internet. And then you can have a data grounded conversation with executive leadership. So, for instance, before, if you were trying to convince executive leadership to address toxic culture, it might be quite an ideological conversation. You might say, we should address toxic culture because it's the right thing to do. And I think we have toxic culture. I can't exactly be sure. But if you can say, look, relative to our peers, we're 2 standard deviations more toxic than everyone else, then the whole tenor of the conversation changes and everything is grounded in data, and it's much easier to have a productive conversation. And the second thing I would recommend is contextualizing culture and strategy. So now you're speaking the top executives' language. One of their top priorities most likely is going to be, how do I successfully execute our strategy? If you can say to them, look, I've reviewed our strategy. Our strategy involves quickly entering a variety of new markets. Well, chances are, in order for that to succeed, we're going to need a culture of agility. And I can help you measure that. I can help you improve that. We can manage agility. then it becomes much more attractive to the top executives who are trying to execute the strategy.
That's some very useful advice, rounding out in high quality data and contextualizing culture and strategy. Jason, do you see this playing out differently in your area of expertise, or is there perhaps anything you would like to add to this conversation?
No, I hate to say this, but I completely agree. I don't have any. I mean, when we think about this area, the most important thing, and Charlie said it really, really well, is having data. And data is what drives our ability to make decisions, impact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I don't have data and all I'm doing, and I'd love to ask the audience this, please. How many of you do a once a year employee satisfaction survey? And that's how you measure culture. If that's how you're measuring culture in once a year traditional models, that's not measuring culture. That's doing a check-in, maybe. And it's usually something that people are afraid to respond to. Okay, if I'm really measuring culture, I'm thinking about collaboration, I'm thinking about the ability to communicate change, and I'm thinking about that alignment. So for me, it's all about having data so that I can quote unquote make decisions. Okay, and that's key. As Krista said, we do it by region, it's great to do it by region. At least it gives you some slice of that data, but really having that real time. Hey, there's a fire here. There's an emergency here. I need to apply some learning here. I need to apply some messaging here in order to drive that culture to meet those outcomes. That has to be an always on model. It has to be an infinity loop model. It can't be a once a year or once every 2 years type approach. And that's probably one of the oldest practices we've had in this space that I see the biggest change going forward. And as Charlie said, you need a platform to be able to do that, because you're not going to have people send in your feelings on interoffice mail.
Indeed. Well said. And while we were at data, I recently read Max had posted something emphasizing the importance of aligning people data with the corporate strategy, which is something that both of you just touched base upon. Max, can you tell us perhaps how can people analytics help navigate, let's say, for example, large policy shifts like, changes in trade or immigration or economic policies? What's your take on this?
So I think the most common error that companies make is that they start with this idea of data-driven or process-driven. So they start with the data and they say, oh, I've got a huge data repository here. Let me analyze to death and see what comes out. And what you'll find is a couple of spurious correlations, a couple of spurious relationships that may or may not have anything to do with the outcomes that you're actually looking for. So the approach that I talk about, which relates to what you're saying, is this idea of business outcome driven analytics. So what you do is you decide, in terms of what you said, well, we want to change the culture, for example, or we want to change our market because Trump is coming into power and there's going to be a lot of changes there. So you define what are the outcomes that you're looking for. And of course, you're going to define cultural outcomes. You're also going to define those 4 things I spoke about: productivity, quality, innovation, customer growth. And then you're going to work backwards from those to say, well, what are the organizational capabilities and workforce capabilities and cultural capabilities, if you like, that I need? And what processes am I going to design to get those? So what you then do is, once you've designed the cultural processes and the recruitment processes that embody that culture, those processes will give rise to the workforce capabilities you need, give rise to the organization capabilities, and generate the business outcomes that you're looking for. So always by starting with the end in sight, which is generally the business outcome, and then you work out what is the inputs that we need. However, it is interesting that it goes against something slightly that I said earlier. What happens if you find that a particular outcome requires you to have a particular culture? And I'll give you a real example of this. This is a published piece of work I did, but I'm not going to name the company, but it is It is published. I discovered that this company made its best sales when it had fairly psychopathic foot in the door salespeople doing its selling. And they would generate incredibly high sales in the first year. But of course, the second year, the customers found out that they had been ripped off and that they'd been conned and that they would then come back. And so I took this discovery to the executive team and I said, what do you want to do with that piece of knowledge that you have? And I thought this was I think this is an exceptional story, but I'll tell it because it's semi-telling or semi-amusing, is that the executive committee said, how long will it take before we feel the negative effects of this culture? And they said, I said, I reckon you'll feel it in about a year to 18 months. And the CEO will say, great, I won't be in the company. That'll be a problem for the next CEO. And, we could laugh at that story, but I would imagine that all of us, Jason, Charlie, myself, we've all been doing this for a while. Those are the realities of working, in organizations. It's not all textbook and all perfect. And even in this world, where Charlie said he's not sure that it would take 6 years, you can do it provided you have the leadership. In another organization that we worked with, a global thing, and this goes, by the way, to this comment about the regional, you can't really do it, Krista. Is it Krista? Yeah. Working by region doesn't really work because you are part of a systemic whole. And when you recognize that you are part of a system, changing one part of the system, the rest of the system will adapt to accommodate that. So, Jorge, where you ask, is there such a thing as an unhealthy culture? For sure. And I think, both of these, guys who've been doing this for a long time would agree with me, is that there are unhealthy cultures. And if you try and fix one part of it, if you perturb the system, as they say, other parts will do that. In psychology, it's quite easy to see that. If I just use a therapy example, if you have somebody who has got, let's say, eating disorders, and you take them out of the family for 6 months and you put them in a nice facility to get over that, you fix the eating disorder. But the second that they come back to the family reconstitutes because they needed that eating disorder because it took the emphasis off the issues that mother and father were having. And exactly the same, if I see a global organization having problems and they're unhealthy, and I fix Europe, all that will happen is that the rest of the world will adjust to take it back to the homeostasis that it was in before. So that's kind of a long answer to a couple of the points that came up. But the main one is that we really struggled, Charlie, with this particular culture change. There was a new vision. $120 million had been spent on a new facility to accompany the new vision, implementing stuff. And half of the executive committee had been with the organization for 30 years, and they were not going to change. And as both of you said really clearly, unless you have the leadership behind you, their downlines are just not going to make those kinds of modifications. And in the end, we had to say to the CEO, you are going to waste $120 million unless you address those executives. And in the end, half of the executives left the executive committee. Now, that's a terrible decision for the CEO to have to make, but I don't know whether there was any other way to do it. I'd be quite interested to hear from the others. But culturally, I think that is the only way you fix situations like that, toxic cultures, for example.
Very interesting perspective. Charlie, you wanted to add something?
Sure. Yeah, we've spent the past 3 years researching toxic cultures, and yeah, Max, what you're saying in a lot of cases is exactly right. I mean, toxic culture has a few drivers, but the most important by far is executive leadership, not just for the decisions that they make further downstream on things like work design, but also for the social norms that they're upholding. And if you have a rotten core of leaders, it's just going to be very, very difficult to change the toxic culture. So unfortunately, there is often no other way except to replace the leadership team. You can try training, you can try coaching, maybe sometimes that'll work, but the reality is it's difficult. And of course, if you don't take steps like that, then it's going to take 6 years, then it's going to take 10 years, then it's going to take 20 years. It's going to take a very, very long time to address to address a culture like that. And as for your point about, everything being interconnected, that's definitely true. I mean, culture is interconnected, not just from the perspective of different segments in a company, it's also highly interconnected between different cultural dimensions. So for instance, if you have a weak culture of psychological safety, you don't know exactly how that's going to work, but that could affect collaboration, that could affect, inclusiveness, that could affect a wide variety of things. But I would say that while it's true that culture is largely interrelated, there is such a thing as a microculture, and you can measure that. There are certain autonomous, parts of the culture that
Sure.
are largely separated from the others, but it certainly is interrelated.
Thank you, Charlie. And just going back also to one of the points that Max said, he said, don't start with data, start with business outcomes, start with the process and the capabilities of your people. Jason, I'm just interested to hear your viewpoint on this. Like, given your experience, would you perhaps be able to share some successful use case where, because we're hearing leadership, executive leadership buying is very critical. Can you perhaps share a success story where you've seen this, end up in success? What's your experience
I
saying?
can share thousands, but I mean, an example, an organization that's looking to expand outside of Canada into Asia, major organization we're working with today. One of their biggest struggles in moving from Canada to Asia is, how do I keep the culture that's been built in Canada structured in Asia, which Asia is different than Canada, right? They're just different.
Mm.
So the concept is, it can't be cookie cutter. It has to be personalized by the persona of that culture, the workforce of that region, and say, how do I still take the values that I have as a corporation or as an organization and right size those to what makes sense for that culture? So we see organizations all the time struggle with us saying, hey, we've expanded, or we've brought on an acquisition, or we've divested the company, and the culture has changed. And sorry to laugh, but yes, the culture has changed. If any of you have ever bought a dog, or you've bought a cat, or you've bought a baby, or had a baby, whatever it is, and all of a sudden there's someone new in your family, guess what? The culture has changed. That's not surprising. And one of the things that is oftentimes the next thing is, well, we need better change management. What we actually need is, we need better change leadership. Okay, change management are the tactics in order to get people to work together. Change leadership is the behavior that I need to be able to demonstrate in order to get people to follow what I'm trying to do. Okay, so I think change management we overspend on, change leadership we underspend on. Okay, and all of that being said, that's what drives these constant, I'll call them agile natures of culture. And I said agile natures of culture because we didn't actually drill into it in much more detail than what I talked about in a second, but culture changes daily. Now, it doesn't make massive seismic changes daily, but it changes daily based on new hires, based on leavers, based on news. Max was nice enough to remind me of our new president in the United States. Notice I said that very openly. I didn't make any statements one way or another. I said nice enough to remind me. We have new crypto laws today. Based on where I live in Minneapolis, some of you saw the tragedy that we had a CEO of one of our major Fortune 500 companies shot on the street in New York. That's a company that I work with every single day of my life. And did the culture change overnight? It did. So all of those things being said, we live in a very, very agile, changeful based world that we have to put culture on that treadmill and saying, I have to look at it daily, measure it daily, and say, just like I'm wearing this Aura ring. Some of you have these rings like that measures my sleep every night. If I measure my sleep once a year or weigh myself every year, that's not enough. Okay, so sorry to pontificate, but all that your initial question, there's thousands of cases, and the organizations that do this well measure themselves and look at data, not in a data-driven way, as Max was saying, not because of data, but using data to empower how I act.
Yeah.
I would just like to ask a short follow-up question. You've mentioned we are under investing in change leadership. How would you advise companies to build this capacity?
So, we break things down into mindset, skill set, and tool set. Okay, it's not a unique thing, but mindset, skill set, and tool set. And oftentimes we focus on mindset very little, skill set, let's do some training on ChatGPT, and then tool set, let's do a heavy tech implementation. And because we put all of our weight on training and implementation and not enough on mindset, what we end up with is we end up putting in technology or focusing on training people how to use that technology without them understanding the why. We focus on the how, not on the why. The why is the part that ties back to culture, not the how. The how just enables that. So when I say change leadership, I'm talking about the why. I'm talking about the why am I doing this? Why is the organization changing? What is the value and what's in it for me to actually align to those things to have this culture? And then the how should be easy. But unfortunately, a strategy is formed. The people that form the strategy step away. It's left to everyone else to put into place. And then all of a sudden we wonder why it didn't change culture.
Of course. Max, maybe you would like to ask a question?
Yeah, I want to just, while we've got, Charlie gave us a great answer about this business of how do you change culture top down if the top is part of the problem. And just to follow on, Charlie, you need a really strong CEO to make that happen. And let's not forget, Jason, while we have your experience here as well, what is kind of your approach to that? Do you walk away from the situation? Otherwise, you'll have a bad case study if the leadership doesn't buy into the required culture, or to get rid of the toxicity, go with the Charlie way of looking at it. How do you handle that?
Max, I mean, I hate to say this, but you have to look in the mirror of the leadership team and say, what's the muscle? Like, what muscle do they have? So I mean, if we think about transformation, it means radical change. And there are going to be some leadership teams that can do radical change well because they've built up a muscle. And there are going to be some leadership teams that don't have a muscle. They've been in the exact same team for 30 years without any diversity, without any new thinking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, to build on the question of Max, what if the CEO isn't strong enough to take up the leadership?
Yeah,
I mean,
was about to ask.
we're pushing a rock up a hill, you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to encourage the leadership team, and this is hard, you guys. I'm not saying this is like, hey, send a Teams note to the CEO right now and be like, hey, you're not weak, you're not strong enough to lead change. Please don't do that. But what we need to do is start building a community of change, a community of culture, and start to influence that leadership team. Okay, and the leadership team is not the CEO. The leadership team is a much greater group than that. It can't be a one-person thing. It's a team sport type approach. So Max, I wouldn't run away, but what I would do is I would take a different approach, which is more of a middle-up approach instead of a top-down approach.
You would perturb the system in the purest sense.
Poke the bear a little, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
And Charlie, from your perspective, how would you build this capacity of change leadership, or how would you go about this building a community? What's your take on this?
Well, you can talk about the leadership team, across the board being essential for buy-in. I think the reality is to improve a culture, you need to pull on a lot of different levers, everything ranging from promotion to work design to choice of the executive team itself. And in most companies, at least most companies that I've encountered, there's only a single person in the company with the capacity to pull on all of these levers, and that almost always is the CEO. So while I think it's important to get the buy-in of as much of this leadership team, this community as possible, in most companies, you're going to get most bang from the buck if you can win buy-in from the CEO, him or herself. And then in terms of, winning this buy-in, I mean, there are tons of different strategies depending on the exact team and the exact circumstances. I would say one thing that makes it quite easy from a cultural perspective is if you have this effective cultural measurement, which is again answering two questions, not just what is our culture, but also what are the highest impact ways to improve the culture. So if you have an effective culture AI platform that measures the culture, and if you have a talented person or small team of people who are translating the data from this platform into insights, then you can get to an incredibly actionable place and say, okay, in order to achieve these cultural objectives, you have to do this here, this here, this here, this here, this here. And it becomes incredibly concrete and incredibly actionable. And that lowers one of the barriers to not all the barriers to action, but one of the barriers to action of executive leadership. If they have very clear instructions, they can see very clearly the cause and effect of these actions, and they know exactly what steps to take. And that can often galvanize action, even in the face of inertia.
I would like to thank you so much, Charlie. I would like to hear from our listeners. Can you tell us, if we're talking about the highest impact to change your company culture, where do you feel you need the highest investment? In the mindset, in the skill set, or the tool set? I'm just interested to, check the pulse of the audience, what people have to say.
I mean, it's really interesting, Nia, when you look at a question like that. All three should be balanced. It's one of the things. Without the right mindset, the question is, should you have a tool set? That's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
Like if you put in a tool set and you don't have the right mindset, what's going to happen? You're going to get information out of the tool, and then you're going to say, okay, now what do I do with this?
Where do you go? Yeah.
Exactly. And then what you're going to do is you're going to start blaming, and Charlie knows this well, you're going to start blaming the tool for not changing culture when it's not the tool's fault, it's the leadership or the mindset's fault. Max?
I just have a great story to emphasize your point. I remember I was working with their head of Europe, guy by the name of Alan, and he had, I wanted to go in and build, they wanted a retention tool. And I said, yeah, I'm going to, do a whole bunch of structural equation models and heaven knows what else to do this. And he said, we don't need that here in Europe. I have a very simple tool. And this just speaks to your point about mindset versus tool set. He said, each of my country heads, we have a spreadsheet, and they list on the spreadsheet, and Charlie, I think you'll undoubtedly go with this as well. They have a name of all the key employees in their country on the spreadsheet. And next to each name, they do a RAG. So red if the person is at risk, green if they're not at risk, amber if they're not sure. And if somebody leaves, and they have to, send this to Elaine every month. And if somebody leaves who you've got marked as green, you are in big trouble. You see, he says, because it's not the technology and Max's retention predictive analytics to tell us if the guy's going to leave. I'm hiring you as the country manager for the relationships that you have with your team. You should have enough of a relationship with each of your people that you know whether they are likely to leave if they're a key person. And that's the culture that we want to build, a culture of caring, of proper relationships with people. And you see, he did that with an Excel spreadsheet. There was nothing complicated to that. And that just speaks to me. That was a mindset solution to a cultural issue. And I've carried that with me to this day. Sometimes the solutions are just so easy, and taking and automating the work that managers do can sometimes distance them from their teams rather than bringing them closer to their teams.
Thank you, Max. That was a very interesting story. How can culture be impacted under rewards and benefits programs separate from tools, networking, team building, experiences?
Yeah, if I could start. So culture is impacted massively with rewards and benefits programs, we actually understand what people want. Okay. Unfortunately, most organizations do a spray and pray type approach to this topic of rewards and benefits, where we need pet insurance, we need cat insurance, we need fish insurance, we need unlimited vacation, et cetera, et cetera. I could sit here the rest of the time, which no one would want me to do, and just name a bunch of stuff. Okay. All of that is fine. But at the end of the day, what's really important is that we bundle all of this up into an employee experience bucket and say networking, team building, experiences. Hey, we want time together because we all work remote. And that's more important to us than this. Okay. We're getting to the point, and we're really, really close, you guys, where personalized incentives and personalized benefits will be how we all work based on what we need. With two boys that are 20 and 17, what I need right now is completely different than what someone needs with two kids that are in diapers. Okay. All of that being said, we haven't been able to scale these types of rewards and benefits programs because it's just been too hard to administer. That's one of the things by leveraging AI and leveraging data that we're going to be able to do much better, but it's going to require design and intent. Okay. It's not just going to be it's last thing. It's not going to be the tool that does it for me automatically. It's going to mean us talking to the workforce, saying, what do you need? What's going to drive the best culture? And how can it be impacted? It can be impacted with a personalized employee experience more than almost anything else.
Thank you,
Almost
Jason.
more than anything else, because people act towards what they're incented on and what they're rewarded on.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, for answering. What's the least painful and most reliable way to collect inputs from the employees? Max or Charlie, would either of you like to answer?
Sure, I have a few thoughts on this. So probably the least painful way to get input from employees is to passively listen to them, to tap their Slack, to tap their email. But I would advise against this, because if you listen to employees without consent, it'll make the culture more toxic. Once they realize they're being listened to, they're going to change their behavior. It's relatively hard to get meaningful data out of such unstructured input data. So I would say two ways to ethically listen to employees in a relatively painless way. One, leverage external review platforms, leverage Glassdoor, Indeed, Kununu, Fairy Godboss. They want you to listen to what they're saying, and there's no cost whatsoever of getting this data. You can just easily scrape this data and analyze it. And two, change your existing survey. Chances are right now you have a traditional survey with 20, 50, 100 questions. Dramatically shorten that. Get that down from taking 20 minutes to taking a minute or 2 minutes to take, and do this with free text questions. Just ask, for instance, a good survey design is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you rate this company? What are the pros? What are the cons? And they just say whatever's on their mind, and you learn a lot more from them speaking proactively than you do from them passively responding to all these questions in a repetitive manner. So I would say leverage external review platforms and dramatically shorten existing surveys.
Thank you, Charlie. And to bring everything full circle, what's one key insight from today's discussion that you think organizations should prioritize so they can stay ahead in the people and culture intelligence? Max, maybe we can hear from you, and then from also Jason and Charlie.
So I think one of the most important messages to come through for me today from the discussion is the idea that technology supports the will of those who are setting and building the culture of the organization. Data, technology are your support for making these changes. They are not the primary tool for driving the change.
Thank you, Max. Jason?
I think that the biggest thing that is so important, how could a healthy organization culture be defined, is to start with that. when you think about measures of success, we oftentimes see organizations think about a culture without saying what a healthy culture is. So take the leadership team, and work with the leadership team to design 5 guiding principles, and then say, what would my measures of success be of that? Okay. That's the number one thing I took away from today, Nina, was that combined with the fact that starts with mindset. Okay. And as much as there's amazing tools, and Charlie's mentioned a number of them on the call here today, as much as there's amazing tools out there, it starts with what do you want to achieve? And I hope that that's the number one thing people take away from this.
Thank you, Jason. Charlie?
Yeah, I'd say the main takeaway, take your existing cultural measurement, replace it with AI, have a CEO who prioritizes the culture, and you will get a dramatically better culture.
Thank you, Charlie. So prioritize culture, data and technology are support of your change process, and design 5 guiding principles of a healthy culture, organization, and a mindset. So I think that today we have only scratched the surface of how people and culture intelligence are redefining HR, using technology to shape the skills and turn data into action. Charlie, Max, and Jason, thank you so much for this engaging conversation, for sharing valuable advice that only emphasize the importance of aligning technology with people-first strategies. To all listeners, I hope you're living inspired and equipped with new ideas, and let's continue the conversation. Feel free to connect with us. Until next time, stay curious and be bold change ambassadors for your companies. Thank you and goodbye to all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.